Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible Study That Doesn't Suck. This is Pastor Megan in San Francisco, and I'm at Grace Lutheran, and our services are on Sundays at 10 a.m. And
Hi, I'm Pastor Amanda Zentz-Allo. I'm coming to you live from Central Lutheran in Portland, Oregon, in Northeast Portland. And our services are at 10:15 on Sunday mornings. Next.
I'm Pastor John Stevens at Zion Lutheran in Oregon City and in Oregon as well, and Oregon City, Oregon. It's hard to tell. And our worship is at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and as you can tell, it's a lot warmer where I'm at compared to Megan and Amanda. I'm in the tropics, and they are bundled up. But anyway, there we are.
there you go.
Yes.
So we kind of all pre-agreed that we think the texts stink again. When we say that, we just mean they're the stupid, whiny, like, bad things happened. It must be God's choice, because if it's happening and our God still exists, then God must want us to have bad things happen. Wah wah.
And they're all threatening. Like, they're all like, the world is going to end and everybody's going to be miserable. And it's like instead of it being promise, it's like threat. And then you add that into our current culture of threat and fear-mongering. And you just have some really hard and awful texts this week. Last week I started my sermon with, like, if you think that these texts were really hard to hear and kind of awful, it's okay, so did I. And I'm just saying, for the next couple weeks, these texts are really hard. And making sense of them in a 12-minute sermon on a Sunday morning is veritably impossible. We won't even do it in this hour. So be nice to your pastors for the next month.
Well, and then the lectionary geeks, I mean, when we're looking at it, you start reading these texts and you just go, oh, we must be near the end of the church year because these texts are terrible and they're dreary. And so we're heading into Christ the King and end times kind of thing. So
yeah, I think it's like a get all the crappy texts out before we're all like, ooh, a baby, pretty. So with that said, we're going to skip to the gospel, because if we don't get to the other crappy ones, you didn't miss much. Okay.
Zechariah going, hey, wait a minute.
Wait a minute. That's great. But when I say that we're skipping to the gospel because the other texts are not fun, it's not like it's a happy, clappy, fun text. Anyway, it's one that if you have ever had student loans in your life, or credit card debt, or a mom that was a banker your whole life, who tells you to not waste away your money, or if you were like me and grew up in the Midwest where you might be third-generation depression survivors who put their money in a sock sometimes. And yay for that, because that means my relatives are prepared for their end times. They have enough money to last them through their nursing home and hopefully and then some, but there's a lot of fear associated with that saving. And so this text, my congregation, when we were doing our Bible study, said, this is not a literal text. This is not advice about saving your money or growing your money. They were very excited to argue that it was complete metaphor about us not talking ourselves, like if someone says, hey, you're great, and then you say, I'm not great, here's the first 18 things I can think of that are wrong with me. That it's a text about discovering that God has given you gifts and using those gifts to accomplish great things in the world. While that's a really great metaphor and a really great sermon and way more preachable than this money stuff, I don't know that Matthew was completely going for metaphor here. I think the ability to share your money was something that the community of Christ was interested in their early days after Jesus was away. However, if you think this is really a text about money, there's some really, let's call them shitty texts in here, because it is the way we've experienced some people who have a lot of money and why they get to keep their money. For example, if you've wondered why CEOs get to make way more money than you could ever imagine, or like, what's that? Scrooge McDuck when he swims through his pile of gold coins. This is kind of like that. Verse 29 says, "For those who have, more will be given, and they will have abundance. But from those who have nothing, even that will be taken away," which is maybe the experience of people who are living in debt in this world and is just a statement of reality. But when it's in a parable about how God sees us in the kingdom that is now and not yet, it's not very much fun. There's no hope for you if you have a lot of debt. Wah wah, saith the Lord. I don't know. What do you think, John?
Well, one of the things that came to mind was thinking about the person who, or the community that this was written for and by. I mean, if there's out of Matthew, we're looking at Matthew being the tax collector, and his, writing what he knows, and so I fall back to the whole metaphor thing, because it is wah wah. um, yeah. So anyway, that's where I'm thinking about Matthew and being the tax collector, and how that the whole aspect of money and collecting and pulling from folks that had nothing, how that that would speak to his whole world. So.
Yeah, I can see how finding a narrative that speaks to the world that you're living in or the profession that you're living in would be amazing. Like, how different would this text be if Matthew was a plumber, or if Matthew was a coal miner, or if Matthew, I don't know, flew airplanes. That's way later in time, but it would have been very, or like if,
really cool if he flew airplanes when he wrote that. That would have been awesome.
right? And he'd be like, "And God's kingdom is like the people in first class when they're asleep." It would be awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's very interesting. For me, part of the reason that this parable really irks me is because of the word slaves. Because you're giving a huge amount of money, which talents were a huge amount of money to give to people. But for me, to give a huge amount of money to slaves and say, "Go make me some more money, person I own," it just sits the wrong way in my mouth. And so if I changed the word slave to anything else, like financial assistant, or son, or treasurer, like, those words would make this parable a little bit more palatable to me. But the idea that it's a slave pisses me off. I get it, because this metaphor is also reminding us that God's in charge and we're not, and our job is to be the people who are owned by God and connected to God, and that God is a master that's not like a documentary on the South, right? It's not. The idea is that this is a different kind of slave master, but still, I don't like that part. That part makes me sad.
The
Hey,
part that
Megan,
always got me when, like, I heard this for the first time. This is one of the, first lessons I heard right after we're right before my baptism, because I was baptized in Advent. So, like, I was actually attending church during this season, and trying to figure out, like, what is God doing in the world, and I read this, and it was just weird. Like, and we come down to verse 24, and "Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. So here's what is yours." And then the slave is called wicked and lazy. And and I I had to, as a new person of faith, like, I had to go to the metaphor, because otherwise there's no way for me to reconcile this scripture with the God that I was coming to know as a God of grace and love and kindness. So there was no way for me to not take it to metaphor. And I don't know that I've gotten, I mean, I'm not that old as a Christian, so I don't know that I've gotten away from needing it to be a metaphor and trying to find some, and even taking my early Christian history course right now, I there is nothing in what I have relearned in these past few months to make this parable make any more sense culturally or contextually, that it's not still difficult and hard and kind of offensive and doesn't make sense. So the only way I can take it and make it preachable is to make it metaphor about don't hide your light under a bushel. And
Does this change
yeah.
anything for you, Amanda? If you were to imagine this text linked to the previous Old Testament text about how God is angry and punishes people, and you imagine, we're not talking about Pat Robinson, but imagine we're talking about someone whose theology is that when you do something wrong, God punishes you and brings a hurricane to New Orleans, right? In that kind of theology, if the person's response to believing that God is that kind of angry person is to just not live their life, to not be the fullness of who they are, to hide the beautiful parts about themselves, like to not love the person they love because you're an angry God and I didn't want to piss you off, so I decided not to. I decided to just ignore who I am and what I'm up to in the world so that you wouldn't get pissed off. And that this is a, what if the parable is saying, when you believe that I am angry and I'm going to punish you, and you use that as a reason not to be your truest self or not to be unique in the world, that offends God. Like, God doesn't want you to do that. If we spin, I mean, it takes a bit, right, for us to get there, but I imagine if that's the kind of theology that's happening here, you might be more on board. What do you think?
I can go with that, right? And but that's again taking it towards that don't hide who you are, and you've been given gifts and you've been created and beautifully and wonderfully made, and don't hide that, and don't squander that. I have to give a shout out, while I'm thinking of it, to John's dollar store children's sermons for this week, because it's a really great children's sermon opportunity for this week. I've got to get to the dollar store yet, but John, I mean, it's kind of the conversation between metaphor or this way that Megan's taking the theology, both can fit with it. I'll shut up.
And while we're doing shout outs, I would also say that if you're following our book club, and the Tutu's book that we're reading, there's a lot of information this week in the introduction in chapter 1 about what happens to you when you keep anger inside of you, or what happens to you when you don't forgive, or when you just keep yourself in a victim state, which this person may or may not be doing. Although I'd have to say that when the retort back is, you're an angry guy, is to like yell at that person and call them wicked and lazy and stupid, they're probably right, because you kind of proved them right in returning anger. So if you want to learn a little bit about what anger can do to you and steps to maybe try a different path, there'll be a link down here that says book club. And you can do it online without reading the book as well, and there's a link down there too.
And hopefully we'll do the link for John's dollar store children's sermons down here.
Of course.
And John?
Yes. Yeah.
You can tell us about that.
Right now I can't tell you about it because I'm trying to remember. Maybe you could tell us about it because it's been a while since I've seen it.
It's Play-Doh. This week, the dollar store children's sermon is Play-Doh.
Play-Doh. Or dough if you get it at the Dollar Tree. Because
that's awesome.
Play-Doh or the other things. Yeah, modeling dough, about how God shapes us and using what God has given us. And
Do you have any recipes for getting Play-Doh out of the sanctuary carpet after this children's sermon?
You're reminding me of the gospel. Debbie Downer. Wow, wow, wow.
But what I liked about it was this idea that, one, you can get a big pack of them and give them out to the kids, or to their adults and let them take it home with them. But the idea of you've been given something, take it and create with it, and make something good out of it, and see what you can come up with. And I think, Megan, I can take where you're going with the idea of, if you have anger in your heart, if you have an unforgiveness towards an individual, or an expectation, and take it to God. I mean, look at what our world has done to our perception, particularly in our culture, towards the divine. If you expect God to hate you because you have been told all your life that God will hate you for whatever reason, that you are not good enough, then there is a bitterness in the interaction with God. I remember being atheist, because I was so angry that God would judge me so hard, and that people would call me names or would think that I wasn't worthy because I hadn't had water on my head. And so I was really, I saw God as the God that I had interacted with as a very judging, angry God. I didn't think that was who God was, though. So, but I can see a tie to the forgiveness issue. I can see a tie to that piece. I think it's still hard to find our way through this text without finding some way to make it not be about money. Or...
But I think what I have learned about money in my life is that pretending that it's not a problem makes it worse, right? Hiding your debt under a pillow makes it worse, and only when you can admit what's going on can you ever start to address it. And if you don't try, you automatically fail by not trying. And so I wonder if this is a text that just simply wants us to try something. Like I think about, particularly because I'm at a small congregation that many people think is or was going to die, and this idea that what my job is to try everything possible so that if it is the outcome that we're going to not have enough money to keep the doors open, at least we tried. And I wonder if, we don't have an example of someone who did try to invest the money and then did a bad job and lost a bunch of the money. But I wonder if the response would have been, at least you damn tried. At least you put effort into it. At least you tried to do something that was going to make money. At least that's at least a metaphor and a way of being with money that works for me. This past couple of weeks, we had a congregation who decided they wanted to leave our space because of my sexuality and because we're having a conference for LGBT students who are college and above age. I'll put a link to the conference down here if you want to go, about justice issues, and they wanted to make sure that they would be out of the building before Christians came to talk about sexuality and issues like that. And on one level, the conversation that we have in response to that is about money, right? Because their leaving represents an $18,000 hole in our budget for next year. And with the small congregation that we have, the thing that often determines whether or not a congregation can keep its doors open is how much savings you have and how long you can afford to pay your pastor from the people that you have or from the savings that you have. And so this money journey becomes really important. And so you can choose to make decisions based on money, choose to make decisions based on what you believe your faith has called you to do. You can choose to make decisions based on emotions. You can choose to make decisions based on just taking so long to make a decision that other people get to make the decisions for you. Or you could, draw things out of a hat. You could let chance be what makes the decision for you. People who like to do that, right? Or flip a coin to figure out what their decision is going to be. And I wonder if this is an opportunity to talk about, like, how do we make our decisions? How does God want us to make our decisions? When it comes to money, what does God want us to do? And I very often will preach about how a text might have worked historically a while ago, but isn't really very fun anymore. My example from last Sunday was in my high school, we did the play Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, which is, if you've ever seen it, the worst play you could ever do in a high school. If you've never seen it, it's because it's the worst play you could ever do. Maybe not period, but close. Because it's a musical based on an Old Testament text where 7 brothers steal women, and they're called the Sabin women. There's a song called the Sabin women in this musical. They steal the women and conquer them, and then they're really excited to be married to the men later. We have a name for that in our current society that was not the same name for that in a previous society. You might see on the news when people steal women and hide them, like, in the basement. It's not a good idea. It's very, very illegal and not okay. So this is a musical that's based on that, and then because they read it in the Bible, these farm boys decide that's the way they should live their lives. They should copy this thing in the Bible. So I think there's some things in the Bible that are stupid, and we shouldn't do them, like stealing women. It's bad. And you can pick your favorite text that you hate and think is dumb and should never be copied ever again. It may or may, it's probably not this text. There's so many worse texts than this particular one. But I want to give you permission that if you read something and you're just like, no way! For me, almost every year, there's a text read on Monday, Thursday, which is the day when people get their feet washed. It's right before Easter. And there's a text that says, the poor you'll have forever. And as someone who worked with the homeless, I'd say, well, screw that. The poor will have forever. We're going to work on that, and we're going to fix that. And that's a dumb text to say we're always going to have poor people. It might be our experience, but no, justice. I want justice. Yep. So I want to give you permission to have a text that you just think is dumb and you just throw it away. And I know that there are people who have said, you're not very Christian because you just throw the text away. Yes, I do. Specifically the ones about stealing women.
So
now to you, John. I like to throw him my awkward moments.
I like that. Yes. Well, so a couple of reminders on this text. One is that this is in an entire section of end times judgment parables. So in the sense when Jesus is telling a parable, in the sense where we have to read this through a certain filter anyway. So whether we throw it out or whether we not, we read it through a certain filter. What I was thinking, especially with this parables, you had mentioned like Pat Robinson. Our whole focus on what money is for would change exactly how we read this text. That if I'm given money and I look at, or I earn a paycheck and I get that and I go, you know what? This is mine because I deserve it, and I'm gonna hold on to this, and this is mine. Or now that I've been entrusted this, and I can now use this for the bettering of the world. I mean, it's almost like how we view baptism. If we view baptism as only a statement of faith, because I do believe you can use your baptism as a statement of faith, but if it's only a statement of faith, and that's all it is, then it's all about me. Mm-hmm. But if we view that baptism as God claiming us as God's children, and we're sent out into this world, there's more there. And so I'm looking at the text. If we look at it as she didn't like what I had to say.
No, I think they have somebody at their door.
I know. This happens to me all the time. No, anyway, so but yeah, the idea that of how we view money is how changes how we read the text. So
They might also be looking for something in the back of their office. That's a
maybe
possibility as well.
it is. It is. So Amanda,
No,
what do you think?
I hear you. I think that there's lots of different ways that we can make this a possibly reasonable place to go. But now that Megan's back, we can hear from them. What are you thinking, Megan?
Oh, I was thinking,
Run away.
yeah, I was thinking about something that Shane Claiborne had been talking about on Facebook this week, and I was looking for it. There's a book of liturgy and its weekly readings called the Liturgy of the Ordinary Radicals. That's the group that Shane lives in an intentional living community in Pittsburgh. And they do very cool things to think about the ways that we spend our money. This is Jesus for President. It's really fun, right? It's got cool pictures, and it's very, very hipster. And they do things like community gardening. They do a lot of justice work. They do a lot of reimagining the ways that you spend money and what it means to be a Christian, and have kind of dedicated their life towards creating a new economy by living in community. And one of the things Shane was talking about this week was the idea that in Jesus's philosophy, he believes that Jesus sees money very differently, that the amount of money that you need is just enough to sustain you. So if you have 2 coats, you've stolen someone else's coat because you only need 1 coat. And to have excess is to be taking something from someone else because you're keeping more than you need. And so I just thought that was a really interesting perspective. Yeah, the Book of Common Prayer. That's a great book.
His Liturgy for Ordinary Radicals.
Yeah, it's really good. I'll put a link down here to some of Shane Claiborne's stuff. It's just a really interesting way to think about what a new economy could look like. Whether or not we actually have the practicality to be able to do that in our modern world, hard to know, but it's really cool to think about, and the books are pretty. I mean, come on. Who doesn't want their book printed like that? Everyone does.
That is nothing new. The idea of living in an intentional community and keeping and maintaining what we have. I mean, again, this history course that I'm taking, we've just spent a ton of time looking at the monastery, the beginning of monastic life, and when that came about in Christian history, and the turn that it takes, and why different flavors of it arise, and what they do and how they influence the history of the Christian tradition. So this idea of living within intentional community and only having what you need, and those kinds of pieces, I think that Christianity goes through cycles where there are those who keep harking back to and pulling back to a simpler way of living, and a communal, simpler way of living.
It's one of the reasons that Holden Village in the mountains of Washington, near Chelan, Washington, that could be a link we could put up as a shout out to Holden Village, that place of justice and intentionality as they look at what it means to live in community together, and their rhythm of community that they begin and end with worship. And it's a place that I always say it's a place that God vacations, but it's also God is it's a thin place for me where the places of the divine and the place of the human, there's a very thin separation there. So,
and we'll be starting the Holden Evening Prayer every Thursday in December at 6 p.m., 7 p.m. I'll put a thing up that tells you the right date.
I was going to say, for the many Lutherans out there who know Holden Evening Prayer, that was written in Holden Village, and for those of you who are not Lutheran or not maybe particularly Christian who join us, which we are grateful for, ELCA Lutherans will have a phrase called Holden Evening Prayer that we kind of toss around, and we assume that everyone knows what that is. It's a setting that was written for evening worship back many years ago, actually late 80s, I believe, could be Vespers 89, I think it was called. Um, and Marty Haugen wrote it, and it is beautiful.
Yeah.
There's particularly the psalm of the piece, "Let My Prayer Rise Up." You can look it up and find it. There's the book, "Hold an Evening Prayer." It's really, really lovely and really beautiful. So if you are looking to hear some music or go to a worship service that won't have much of a sermon to it, if you want to just go and listen to some beautiful music and maybe sing some beautiful music and enjoy a lovely setting, I encourage you to give a shot for an Holden evening prayer service
Go
close to
somewhere where
you.
there are others who know how to sing it, because there's some challenging parts that repeat. And if you don't have people who have sung it before, it can be really tricky unless you're really good at sight reading. So try for your first time to go somewhere where there'll be like at least 12 people who already know how to do it. So it'll feel real good.
And it's a wonderful opportunity, and I think you'll find it a lot during Advent. You might find an evening worship service. Advent is a season coming up, the 4 weeks before Christmas, and there will be churches around that are having evening services and using the Holden evening prayer setting. It'll also happen in like the 6 weeks before Easter, and that's Lent. A lot of people will use Holden evening prayer during that season as well. So you can go. It's a less kind of, maybe a little less intimidating, to go and check it out for the first time, not on a Sunday morning, and it's a beautiful setting. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, about Holden Village. They have amazing bread and an entire wall of loose leaf tea. It's really wonderful.
Yeah. But yeah,
That.
they
Yeah,
do
go
have a
ahead.
great. Holden has a great cookbook out that's based on cooking simply. It's a simply living cookbook that following that theme of living simply. So
Boy, and that's a good transition into Thessalonians. I don't know how, but it sure darn is.
wow, great.
um, one of the things that I think is, if you are tired of the texts that say that God is angry, at least the First Thessalonians text offers you an out from that. It talks about bad things happening to us because that's the way creation works. That's the way birth pangs work, and we know that that leads to uh, hopefully beautiful things when the serotonin rushes to the mama's brain, and then they have this deep, unending love for the baby after the pregnancy happens. Um, but there's this beautiful language about God not always being angry. God not always, I think Psalm 130 says, God's anger lasts for a moment, but God's love lasts a lifetime. That one's one of my favorites. But this text is trying to remind us that this being vigilant and this urgency is really about waiting for God to come back, which they thought was going to happen like 5 minutes ago, um, and that it's about being present for when God appears in the world. Now that it's been 2,000 years of waiting and waiting and waiting, it becomes a little difficult to keep that same sort of attention span if we had to stay sober for that whole time. Well, that didn't go very well. Prohibition. Remember that? Didn't go so well. But there's this need for us to try to pay attention to what God's up to in the world. Maybe that's the metaphor of the previous gospel text that says what God is up to is the gifts that we have and the good, God's work, our hands, ELCA slogan, right? Or maybe that is God equipping us with this extra armor, right? The hope of salvation, the breastplate of faith and love. Maybe that's the community around us that's able to support us and grow our talents and make us really excited. But I love this last line, therefore encourage one another and build up each other as indeed you are doing, which if all Paul did was say that over and over, wouldn't this be a different theological world?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I actually ran with that a bit last week. The encourage one another is where I went with the sermon, and it was again from the First Thessalonians text, which is the oldest text we have in our New Testament. And I talked a little bit about that and the idea of being afraid that what we can do is encourage one another. I think I would love to chat for just a minute about the idea of the breastplate of faith and love and the helmet for the hope of salvation, because I think that we have a difficult time in our culture, particularly those who are not comfortable in the church or who haven't grown up in the church or who have been hurt by the church, with some of the militaristic language that comes out of our tradition. And this is one of those places. Paul writes a couple different places about the armor of God. And you can Google armor of God and find some really disturbing, like, children's games and different things like that that are not very hopeful. So I would like to lift that up as something that it took a very, very dark place in my life before I could understand a piece of comfort in that. And so one of the people who have been a saint in my life who have spoken words of hope and healing was the organist at my first congregation, was supplying as the organist there. And in the midst of a very, very difficult situation, in the midst of a really difficult church conflict and different pieces that were very hard, this organist came up to me and very quietly told told me, had gave me a copy of a Celtic tradition prayer, which the what typifies a Celtic tradition prayer is that the the prayer is that God will surround you entirely. That God will be in front of you and behind you and above you and below you and on your right and on your left, and that God will fully surround you in all ways and be with you wherever you go. That's a very typical kind of quality of Celtic prayer. You can find it if you look up the breastplate of St. Patrick. You'll see how it goes. We'll put a link. We're gonna have a lot of links this week. um, but there's this kind of overarching, all-encompassingness of the prayer. And so I was given this prayer, and then a week or two later, the individual came up to pray with me and said, I pray for you the armor of God to surround you and to hold safe within a hard shell the things that are soft about you, so that you do not lose that softness in this time of difficulty and trial. And I had always seen, like, the armor of God as something you put on so you can go into battle and be stronger and you can take on the world and rah, right? But it wasn't, I had never thought about it as being something to protect the softness and the kindness and the hope and the grace and the ability to have those things, that needed protecting as much as I needed to be seen as hard and strong from the outside. So when thinking about the armor of God, I would say to those who are not comfortable with that imagery, who are not familiar with finding armor as being a positive thing, to perhaps consider a time in which you have needed that so that you could be about the hard work of forgiving, for example. Sometimes you need to just let God be all around you and so close and all around you that nothing else can get in, but that God is going to be that barrier between you and the world, so you can do what you need to do inside to be well and to be with God. So that's what I will say. And we've had a new individual join us. So
Yes. Hi, Dan. I just wanted to comment to what you were saying real quick, Amanda, because I love, you might not have been able to see it, but your description of the soft armor of God while wearing a hat and gloves and a jacket was really quite beautiful. And I think that's part of what we can imagine is we can imagine, I mean, if you think of the number of spiritual traditions where putting on a soft hat is what you do to be close to God, and you put something on that sacred place for you, that I think is an interesting kind of metaphor. The Mormon tradition just put out a video not too long ago about why they wear a layer of clothing underneath their clothes to be really close and connected to God. Some people in culture have called it Mormon magic underwear, which might be good alliteration or silly, but I'll even put the video down there because I think it's an interesting video about why they choose to wear a layer of clothing to be present to God at all times. And I think whatever it takes for you to feel like you're close to God and are protected and being held safe, I think is what God's interested in. Dan, can you hear us and talk? Do you want to introduce yourself and say where you're coming from, or are you just frozen right now? You're frozen right now. Anyway, everyone, that's Dan. Dan's on internship / thrown to the wolves to be in charge as a pastor. He's at a 2-point parish. I want to say that you're in Arizona or Colorado because I can't remember, and I feel like both would really work well for you. So maybe if you have the ability to speak again, we'll know which of the two that you're at. But Dan, we're excited that you're here. The picture that was earlier before Dan's picture came up was a picture of Dan preaching at my installation. So that was fun.
You know, I'm looking at the text. You know, we always ask, or a question I ask is, you know, where's the good news in this? Where's the good news in all of this? And at verse 11.
Hey, Dan. I'm going to put you on mute real quick. Hold on. You keep talking, John. I'm going to put Dan on mute real quick until we figure it out.
So verse 11, that's gospel for me. So, you know, therefore encourage one another and build each other up. Indeed, as you are doing, or, you know, and I love that, as indeed you are doing, because that's that sense where it's like, you know, you've got folks that have been beaten down, you got folks that are trying to figure out their way in the world, and that verse of encouragement in the sense of going, you guys are doing it. You know, I mean, there's days you don't feel like you're doing it, but that's just a wonderful, grace-filled text right there. And that's I love that.
Amen.
Hi, Dan. Oh, see, now it's backwards. Hi, Dan.
So,
put your thumbs up if you're moving. Are you moving right now? Can you put your thumb up?
oh yeah, I saw him.
You put the thumb up?
No thumb up.
No thumb up. We can't tell if you're moving. We think it's great that you're here.
John, I would agree with you. I think that is a word of grace, and that really is, you know, keeping, and it's a refrain through 1 Thessalonians multiple times to say, you know, keep encouraging one another, and you're doing it, and that could preach. That could preach.
That's a preachable moment right there.
Yeah, and I missed it because I was writing a note to Dan.
Well, that's it's in 1 Thessalonians. It's one of the verses. If you read back, you might find it. So, yeah.
I'll watch it back, maybe.
Yeah. You encourage us, Megan. Indeed, you are doing it. So there we are. Yeah.
Yay, I get the points for not listening. What? Anybody want to say anything about Judges? Here's what I think about Judges. It's judgy. Judges is judgy this week. No? Nothing?
No.
All right. Zephaniah? Anything fun about Zephaniah?
I'm looking at it.
Okay.
Other people can look at it down here.
Feel free to scroll down. We don't think it's very fun or exciting. I've put in italics, by the way. When you see the text in italic, it's the text that won't get read aloud in most churches on Sundays, but it's just there so that you'll have context to see what's up in between what was cut out. Sometimes it's really interesting. Oh, the thing that was really fun about Zephaniah in our Bible study is we've been noticing that there's been like 3 weeks in a row in the lectionary texts that have poop references. And this week's poop reference is by far the most poetic of all the poop references we have had so far. So listen to this, and just close your eyes and get in a poetic state. Ready? I will bring such distress upon people that they shall walk like the blind, because they have sinned against the Lord. Their blood shall be poured out like dust, and their flesh like dung. Isn't that like the most poetic? You guys suck
especially with you
ever?
reading it.
No.
Oh, come hither.
I feel like I was trying to read it in like the put your child to sleep by reading them a book in a nice voice. Come on, your flesh will come out like dung. That's amazing. I want to
It's
see that in
in the
CGI.
Bible.
I want to
It's-
see that.
No.
I want to see that. I'd pay money to see that. Anyway, no.
This is
no, I won't.
that day will be the day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of ruin and devastation, the day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, a day of trumpet blast and battle cry against fortified cities and lofty battles. Come on. You just need like Ewan McGregor or somebody. Imagine if James Earl Jones read this to you. It would be awesome, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, so,
That's what I'm saying. And that's how pastors talk about the text without saying anything at all.
so kind of a callback to the gospel lesson.
Speaking of not this text.
Right, but no, I was thinking while you were talking about the gospel text, movie reference, the whole "with great power comes great responsibility." I mean, the sense that from what and that's I keep coming back to Spider-Man. So that's great power
Really?
comes great responsibility.
I was thinking Lord of the Rings, though I've never seen it, so I don't know if that's actually true. Isn't like the ring? It has to be destroyed because it has so much power and blah blah blah.
One ring will rule them all. Yes.
See, that's what I'm saying. I knew there was something geeky that would.
And only one who is not seeking power can hold on to the ring long enough to actually destroy it, because
Right.
it takes a special kind of person to be given power and not abuse it.
So sometimes when I'm preaching, I wish I could put the ring on and just disappear.
Disappear!
Yeah.
And that's what God wants you to buy.
Oh yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, this last Sunday I learned, don't remember to remind the congregation that you now have gluten-free wafers in the middle of talking about the words of institution, because I don't think Jesus blessed gluten-free wafers.
But he will.
Think of that earlier or later. That's my advice.
Okay. Good. That's your liturgical piece for today?
Yeah. Don't do that then. It comes out weird.
And the
Ultra
other-
killed by Megan. Anyway.
Yes.
The other tip I would give, and it seems really odd, but it actually works functionally. So for newer pastors out there, or for interns, or for other folks, when you're giving directions, one easy way to figure out the gluten-free thing without having to do the, oh, sorry, okay, here you go, part, is to have them raise their index finger as they come up to the altar, so that when they come to get the bread, they can raise their index finger and they don't have to be like, no, gluten-free, no, don't give me the thing that's going to make me sick, right? They can just be like, ding, and you're like, sure, here you go. And it's like,
for those who need 2 helpings, they just give 2. And if they want, oh no, sorry, different.
if you had too
We
much.
have a hard time. We have a hard time. We have some people who can't have very many carbs that day, or they can have a lot, and so sometimes they'll want a little piece. You got anything for, like, is it like this, or
Could you do a
like,
half? I mean, at some point you'll have to have like a key in your bulletin of all the different like symbols. No, I think I have found
I just
that
say to
having-
them, I say,
that
do you need a
helps.
little one today? And they go, no, regular size is fine. And then it feels like, supersize my Jesus. We'll get there. We'll get there. I don't know.
All parts of the outtakes.
I just don't want Jesus to make you sick later.
Right, that wouldn't be good. That wouldn't be
That's
good.
exactly it. That's really what it's about. It's not about trying to single people out or anything like that. We don't want to make our people sick.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now go raise money for the church, you wicked slave. What?
Oh.
That's a horrible biblical
Wow.
message. Does anyone? But like, remember that you're on YouTube right now, raise your hand if you feel like your council or board has ever said to you, not where you're currently serving, but somewhere else, of course, go raise some money, you wicked lazy slave. No? You guys are good. You're on YouTube. It's very smart.
I've got
Look
that
at
from other
Amanda's face right
organizations.
now. Look at Amanda's face right now.
Other organizations, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's for my Derby League up north. There were, there were 9 skaters and like 5 regular volunteers, and we had a $2,000 a month rent to pay. So yeah, there was a lot of get out there and raise some money however you can
But
for
if
that
we've
organization.
if we've all had horrible bosses before, and we can relate to this text because we've all had horrible bosses, does it change anything for you? Like, because we're people who our whole life's work is like the God thing, right? And so do you feel a little sad if when you go to heaven, God's a jerky boss? Or is it like, okay, that God's grumpy and has a bad attitude because they're God? Because this parable might be true, y'all. This might be how God is.
Or might not.
Or not.
I can't believe that. And I had an icky boss. Like, I worked in a corporate store that I'm not going to name on YouTube. But I worked at a corporate store whose product line went in a direction that I could not ethically continue to sell that product line because I felt that it went into a different area than they had previously. And so my response was to leave that organization, was to leave that job. I couldn't ethically participate in it. So I don't think that, I mean, if God is an angry, bitter God, that's why so many of our generation aren't in church, because that's who they think God is. And I think that we are trying to say that is not who God is.
But what about
who we expect?
Another shout out to Animate. To another thing, we could put another link. Animate Faith, the Animate series, put out by Spark House in Augsburg, but the Animate Faith. Brian McLaren's whole conversation around faith and around when he talks to someone and they say they don't believe in God, he has to ask them the question, what God don't you believe in? And as he hears the God that they don't believe in, he says, then when he hears about that God, he feels like an atheist as well, because he does not believe in that kind of God either. And so there's a wonderful conversation. It was like, yeah, that's. Yeah. There is a great, speaking of corporate America, there's a great Simpsons episode, probably 10 years ago, since it's like in its 25th year, but like 10 years ago, where Burns buys out the church, and there's corporate sponsorship for Reverend Lovejoy's congregation. And it is an interesting, talk about a good conversation starter around corporate and how we use our money. Back to the gospel lesson, because I notice how I'm avoiding Zephaniah every turn. So it's like he's the person. Zephaniah is that person that's in the back of the party that you don't want to talk to, and there's I'm keep going over to talk to Matthew. So
their blood shall be poured out like dust, and their flesh come out like dung.
Oh,
come on! Don't you kind of want to put that in the reading? And have that one person who would just squirm read this on a Sunday?
No!
Slightly?
No!
It's really good.
I mean, it's going to be read on Sunday, but... No!
Come on.
I think we're done. Are we done?
I think we're totally done. And also, for all of you who have noticed the difference when we do the early morning Bible study by how punchy we are, you're welcome. For all of the bazillion links, you can look down here. That's what's going on down there. And thank you for watching Bible study that doesn't suck. Why you watched for this long, I have no idea, but good on you.
God bless you.
God bless you. If you're using the mobile app, there is a feature where you can contact a pastor, and it will send an email to me. And then if you would like to talk to John or Amanda, I can forward it to them. I can't guarantee they'll respond back because sheesh, can't get them to show up for anything. It's not. They'll probably show up. But if you're in need of care, and reaching out to us through this online forum is something that feels like church to you, then we would like to invite you. You can be in conversation with us, and we'll probably respond. If it takes us a couple days, Christmas is coming, and we might be tired. But we'll get there, we promise, eventually.
If it is an emergency, don't send an email.
Yeah. If it's an emergency, walk to John's church and knock on the door.
That'll work.
That's probably the easiest way. That's right.
Or call 911.
Yeah, that's an actual emergency. Yeah. We all need a nap. Anyway, thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next week for maybe more sucky biblical texts. We'll find out. Maybe they'll be awesome. Maybe.